Can a book be overly simplistic? Welcome, my Mere Mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. My name is Kyron. I am co-host of the Mere Mortals podcast, but I also do this one where we dive deeper into individual books and pull out the individual themes, juicy information, stuff that we could perhaps apply to our everyday lives, and just give a general review of the book in total. Today I have for you Yukio Mishima's The Sound of Waves. This book was published in 1954, and it's about 180 pages in length, which will take you probably about 3 hours to read because it is not super dense in terms of words per page. It's a simple tale, a love story in fact, of a young boy named Shinji and a young girl named Hatsui who pursue their courtship through hardship and gossip. So it takes place on the island of Utajima, which is an island of mainland Japan. And it's a very smallly inhabited island, I think a couple of thousand people at max, which makes it an interesting scenario for trying to pursue a courtship because there is just so much gossip everywhere around. Everyone knows everyone. So Shinji was raised on the island and Hatsui had family members there, but was actually raised off on the mainland, I believe. And she comes on and through a series of kind of fortuitous / planned circumstances, their love starts to blossom. Once it comes out, there is a somewhat separation between the two. She is sequestered in her home by her uncle, and so they can't see each other. And I suppose Shinji has to prove his worth to be worthy of her love is the general story. And I won't give more details than that otherwise I'll ruin the atmosphere of what's happening in the book. There's quite a lot of other characters who appear. So his brother, his mother, and his mentor all play a part as well, I suppose, what you'd call a rival for her love. So it's a fairly simple tale. There's not too many characters, but the book is also short, so it kind of feels like there's a fair chunk of amount going on. I'm going to talk a tad about the author and just, I suppose, this book in before we get on to the main themes. And it is definitely idealistic and evocative. And I suppose that's the style that you can get from Mishima. I've previously reviewed another book of his called The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, which was definitely, you can see these recurring themes of the sea, the ocean, the sound of waves, young boys. That was focused on a young boy as well. And if you want more details on this, you can actually check out a conversation I had on the Mere Mortals podcast with Alexander Watanabe, who has read a bunch of these books as well before. And so we really examined some of the style of Mishima and Japanese works there. So the first theme, and there's two that I've taken from this, and one roughly applies to Shinji and one roughly applies to Hatsui or is personified by them, which is perseverance, the first for Shinji, and which is a continued steady belief in spite of opposition is the rough definition of that word. So Shinji and others, they have this surety about them, which I thought really stuck out for me. And this is, I suppose, something that you can get from a repeated day in and day out difficult activity. And you can kind of see this on page 13, which I'll read from you now, which is he's kind of met Hatsui and then is now trying to kind of process his feelings for her, which he saw. It was like, oh, wow, this girl, she's kind of unsettling. And so it says, the strange unrest was still with him this morning, but the vast ocean stretched away from the prow where he was standing, and gradually the sight of it filled his body with the energy of familiar day-to-day toil, and without realizing it, he felt at peace again. The boat was shaking mincingly, with the vibrations of the engine and the biting morning wind slapped at the boy's cheeks. So you can kind of see there how he had this anxiety, I suppose you'd call it, and then when he got back to his normal activity, which was being a fisherman on a boat, very hard activity, lots of manual labor involved and lots of time spent on your own somewhat, even though he is with another shipmate and the captain, it is a very kind of solitary pursuit in many ways. And you could say something similar occurs for some of the other characters, for the women as well, but maybe to a lesser extent where they go pearl diving, which is once again a very dangerous, hard activity where you hold your breath and dive deeper into the ocean bed and the floor and collect pearls. So I'd say something similar is created there, which is this idea that if you do something hard day in, day out, you can gain a surety from this, a purpose almost. Now, if you compare this to some of the other characters in the book, such as Yatsuo, who is the rival of Shinji for Hatsui's love, or Hiroshi, which is his younger brother, who is of a primary school age, so let's just say 10 to 12, something like that maybe. And you can see there's the difference between the two of them. So Yatsuo is kind of privileged, even though he's still relatively poor. He is less poor than everyone else on the island, and so he has never had to work this day in, day out gruel. He's kind of got this position of power or leadership in terms of the Young Men's Association on the island. And so he's got this bravado, and you'd probably say it's a false bravado. He kind of lacks integrity. Also, when you see with Hiroshi, his brother, it's almost like he hasn't had the time to develop this surety, because he's just a young kid. You know, he's playing with his friends. He's had to do some hard things and endure some stuff, but you can see he's kind of flighty. He'll fight with his friends, and then the next moment they'll make up, and he's kind of distracted doing all of these things. He seems like a good kid, but he doesn't have the presence, I guess, that you'd say that someone like Shinji does. Now, just because you can persevere and have this steady belief and you can push through things, doesn't actually mean that good outcomes are going to come. So as the book is progressing on, you're kind of still in doubt as to whether, even though it seems like Shinji and Hatsui should be together, their love is kind of pure. They obviously have connected in this deep way. There's still no guarantees that because he has this perseverance aspect, this quality to his character, there's no guarantee that he's going to get the girl in the end. And you can kind of see this as well in the contest between Hatsui versus Shinji's mother, who was only ever called Mother, where there's a pearl diving contest, and they go down, and both of them kind of had this perseverance as well in a way, and it's just like, well, I don't know who's going to win, the older, more experienced lady who maybe doesn't have the youthful energy, or the girl with the youthful energy but doesn't know the tips and tricks that you can gain from being older and doing things an extra 20 years. So Shinji's heroic swim as well. He has to go and tie this rope to this buoy because their ship is trapped in a hurricane or a typhoon or something like that. And it's still kind of uncertain, like, is he going to make it? Will he do it? So there's still this tension, which I think is nice, because a book without that tension is kind of boring. So even though you can have this perseverance, this aspect of surety, it's almost like you don't know things are going to be right, but you have a belief in spite of this opposition, which is going back to the definition of perseverance. Now, the thing, I guess, to question is, what does Shinji believe in? Why, just because you have a belief in something, does that automatically confer an ability to act in the world in a way that's beneficial? So you could be, super believing in some sort of god that requires you to self-flagellate and, lose a lot of blood, but that's probably not going to help you too much in the world. So this could maybe be a reference to the title, The Sound of Waves, where he's got this kind of belief in the ocean. It's always there for him. The surety that there will always be fish, that there's always the wind will always be the wind, sort of thing. The waves will always be the waves. That would maybe be it. You could maybe also say just hard work, pursuing this difficult task of pulling fish from the ocean, or getting these, I think they were lobster pots or octopus pots or something like that, pulling that up from the ocean floor, that kind of hard work. But there's no guarantees with humans. There seems to always be an element of this tension, which is, okay, even though you can have this perseverance aspect to your quality, this characteristic to your personage, I guess, I don't know, to your person, that doesn't mean good outcomes are going to come from it. It just means you can maybe work at things a little bit harder than someone like Yatsuo, who gives up relatively easy because he hasn't had that formation, that strength of will, that steady belief that, okay, I can do this. I've done this a million times before. I can push through this hard difficulty. Now, this will get, I suppose, link up into the next one, which is the more a characteristic, I would say, of Hatsui, which is prudence. So there's the ability to govern and discipline oneself by use of reason. So with her, there seemed to be this level of forethought and cunning in a way. So there's many times in the book where you can say, okay, she made a very good decision there. And some of these include to her decision not to omeko, which is, I believe, a Japanese word for to have sex or to have intercourse. And so there was this time where they were kind of sheltered up in these ruins during this big storm, and Shinji, being a young male, just he wants to have sex, of course, but she purposefully doesn't do it, and that makes a big difference to her. A very smart, wise decision. She has this wariness of Yatsuo, and you can kind of see this in the scene right towards the end, in the middle of the book, where it's somewhat of a dangerous scene for her, for sure. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And her system of letters as well. She's very crafty, so when she is confined to her room and is forbidden from seeing Shinji, she comes up with this idea of how to create this system of letters so they can still communicate somewhat. So she definitely has this prudence ability, this ability to govern and discipline oneself by use of reason. So she's very on point with thinking, okay, like, what do I have to do here, and how can I continue what I want to happen to go on? Now, you might ask, okay, but why does she have it and why does she need it? And this is where it's something like beauty. Her beauty is constantly referred to in the book. She's kind of in the prime of her youth. She's it's like a terrible power that she has. It's kind of capturing of people, and this is a power that can be squandered for sure, and it can be kind of thrown away to whoever, because everyone kind of wants it, I suppose. And even this power can not only have an effect on the men, but also on the women. And you can see this in this scene where they're all comparing breasts when they're going to do this pearl diving. So they obviously do it without a top on. I say obviously because in the book they're talking about how they do it without it. And they're kind of comparing breasts, and the old grandma's making jokes about her saggy ones. Shinji's mother is still somewhat proud of her breasts, even though they're starting to age. But there was no doubt in anyone's minds that Hatsui's breasts were the most firm. And I won't be able to find the scene just out of the blue, but there's a whole load of description that goes into her breasts and how wonderful they are. So I think this kind of relates to dating dynamics as well, which is, she's the one being chased. She is the one who is beautiful, who has this somewhat power, and it's the suitors need to prove their worth to her. And this is why you might need perseverance as a man and maybe not as much prudence, because she is the one who ultimately kind of makes the decision of who she wants to be with. And this is kind of where you get some weirdness going on. Like her uncle Teru is kind of slow on this uptake. And it's only right towards the end of the book where he recognizes, oh, okay, Shinji is actually a much better man than Yatsuo. And or Yasuo, I might have been adding a T in there where there was none. And so this is where she is the one who needs to be more prudent from an earlier age. So I just thought those two themes were somewhat interesting, of how these two different characters, even though you could just say they're both young men and women or young boy and young girl on an island, their characteristics and what they need to succeed in their life to have a better life are quite different. Hers is maybe more of an intellectual type one, even though there are aspects of perseverance to her character, definitely more the prudent side. And then also for Shinji, he needs to have more of the perseverance, this kind of surety, hard work thing, and then a little bit of this more rational thinking as well. So very cool to kind of see the dynamic between those two played out. I'm going to go into my personal observations and takeaways. And as I was referring to at the start, can a book be overly simplistic? it is a very simple book in many ways. There is a not, it's kind of sparse on the dialogue, but it's very rich inner and outer world. So there's a lot of description of the ocean, of this temple that's on the island, of I kind of guess the inner world of what they're feeling. And so I'm going to jump here onto page 79. And this is where there was another girl who was kind of almost Hatsui's rival, who was vying for Shinji's love. And she was kind of realizing she was losing this battle and she wasn't going to be able to be with him. And there's just a scene where it says, her thirst for knowledge whetted by a life of moving from lighthouse to lighthouse, from remote island to remote island, the mother always pictured her daughter's life as an ideal dream. Never once did her eyes perceive her daughter's little inner unhappiness. There was just something about that last sentence there, her daughter's little inner unhappiness, that just really spoke to me. I thought, man, that's an amazing way of describing what she would be feeling there. And it kind of recalled to me this style of being very simplistic in many ways, but can it be overly simplistic? For sure. But for this book, I wouldn't have said this was the case. And you can kind of see something similar in Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. And maybe it's something to do with this aspect of the sea, of the sailor's life, which draws in this kind of writing, perhaps because there's not that much out there. So you need to have these rich inner details and be kind of sparse on the dialogue and really dive deep into once you get past the boringness, what is kind of beneath the boring out in the ocean or something like that. But yeah, I would say probably you can have a book that's overly simplistic, but I wouldn't have found it in this one. I thought it was a nice level of detail while still being pretty simple. It's a love story. It's not super, super complicated. There was also one scene midway through, and I referenced this just before, where Hatsui was getting some water from a stream, and she had to do this for whatever reason at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning due to restrictions on water supply and things like that on the island. And so Yasuo kind of meets her there, and he's formed in his own mind that she belongs to him in a way. And man, as I was reading the scene, I was starting to get worried because I was enjoying the book up to that point, but having read about the scene with I can't remember the young boy's name in The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, but him and his friends are kind of sadistic, and there's one scene which is really fucked up where he crushes a kitten or a puppy in his hand. I believe it was a kitten. And then there's another one right at the end, which is kind of implying they're going to disembowel this dude. And I was just going like, oh God, there's going to be this awful rape scene coming on here. This is not going to be super fun reading. Thankfully, it didn't turn out that way, and this is where you could look at Hatsui's prudence and go, yes, prudence wins the day. Thankfully, she avoided a really bad scenario, but it wouldn't have taken much for it to turn to become a bad turn. So yeah, I having read one of his previous books, it was nice to see he didn't go back to the same kind of crass, gross, just something that is very hard to read. It's not fun reading about rapes and crushing kittens and people being disemboweled and things like that. So I'm glad that didn't happen. So in summary, it's a beautiful and relaxing read of young love. It's very simplistic and maybe overly so in some ways, but I just really enjoyed it. Mishima is a very distinct style, and I would say it's worth trying out his books just to see if you like it. So the book itself, it hasn't hit home per se for me. It's not one of the. I do actually like ones where there is a bit more, I suppose, meat to the bones, where I can dive even deeper into it. But like I just said, it's a very enjoyable read. So overall, I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. The Sound of Waves by Yukio Mishima. Give it a check out. I think you'll enjoy it. And so that is it for today, my mere mortalites. Thank you for joining me to this part of the video. What are your thoughts on Mishima, The Sound of Waves, or this book in particular? I'd always appreciate a comment just down below if you can do that. Also a like and subscribe. But I also recommend checking out the Mere Mortals podcast, and where we examine, I suppose, a lot more of these kind of themes and details, and we do it in a more conversational style. It's a lot more fun, and so I highly recommend that you go check out that podcast as well. It's also available on YouTube and via audio. So hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, especially if you're in Utajima, and we'll catch you for the next book review. Karen out.